All right. What I'm going to be discussing today is related to the robust and reliable science of organization research. And I'm going to be talking about the role of ethical socialization of management scholars and how our knowledge of the organizational socialization literature can inform how we have a more robust and reliable science. So why do I think socialization is so important? One of the reasons that socialization is so key for producing good science is because our science is in a position where we really do have to rely a lot on the researchers who are performing the studies to be ethical, to do the right thing, even when not observed. It's always difficult for people to see whether or not the research is being done correctly. And a lot of people have talked about ways to catch people after the fact. The easiest way to catch people if they're doing research that's in their own office, without a lot of people around, without a lot of observation from a leader role. The best way to do that is to make sure that each individual who is doing the research has the right motives, has the right training, has the right ideas, and that will mean that we're having a bottom-up ethical science of research that is robust and reliable. So everybody sees what everybody else is doing in a local setting, everybody has the right values, and so that starts from socializing people to be the right kind of research. So our research is unobserved. That's one of the key reasons I think socialization is so important. It has to be internal to the person. The second thing is that there are huge incentives for misbehavior, and that's one of the things I want to talk about. The advantage of doing unreliable, non-robust research is enormous for the person who's doing it. So we have in place, I'm also going to talk about how socialization has bad implications as well. People can be socialized to do the wrong thing, and in a lot of cases our field socializes people to do the wrong thing. People don't necessarily go into the field expecting to do the wrong thing, but they learn that there's a huge advantage to that, and we need to think of how to tamp that down while preserving the motive to do a lot of good research. So that's one of the tensions that I really want to draw on. Like I said, policing each study is massively expensive. We cannot have Sherlock Holmes in every single research laboratory looking over everybody's shoulders. But if we can get a bottom-up process where the culture is developed around doing research the right way, reporting the truth, doing things in a rigorous way, that solves the problem. A lot of times when we think about a public good like the reputation of a field, the best way to do that is to spread the incentive broadly, to spread the values and use that as a lever. And so that's something we know from research. So what are the key principles that I'm going to discuss today? The first thing is that robust and reliable research begins with ethical researchers. So that's the first principle, and I've already discussed why I think that's so important. It has to start with every single researcher saying, this is part of my role, this is part of who I am, doing good research is something that I believe in and that I want to promulgate in the field. And my second premise is that ethical researchers are the product of ethical socialization. I mentioned that there are a lot of incentives for doing things the wrong way. So the first thing that I'm going to put out there for people to consider is do no harm. Don't do things in the socialization process that send people a signal that it is okay and advantageous to do the wrong thing in research. That's probably the most important thing we can do. Look at how our incentives are set up and say, yes, getting published is extremely important. I don't want to make it sound like I don't think that's a huge deal. That is extremely important. But getting published for the right reason and in the right way, that's the most important thing. And we have to make sure we're not sending signals to people that it's okay to do things the wrong way. The second thing is look to structures and behaviors that send the right signals. What are the things that we are doing that tell people how to do things the right way? And in designing those structures and behaviors, we need to consider the self-interest of the person who's engaged in the behavior. What are they going to get out of being a good researcher? We need to consider their personal values and how we can leverage those. We have to consider the social context and also this idea of harm avoidance, which I'll talk about as well. So when you see some of these terms that I'm putting up there, those of you who are familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work on moral foundations theory may hear some things that sound kind of familiar, and that's one of the things I'm going to talk about. We have different nodes in our brain for moral behavior, and we want to think about how to touch as many of those as possible. And so we want to have something that grabs on a lot of those. The second thing is, from the socialization research, we know that people who are new to a field are learning a lot about what's normative behavior, and so we really want to think about how expectations for behavior and communication are formed for newcomers. The second thing that happens is role clarity is established. People need to know what their responsibilities are for robust and reliable research. And that includes knowing what your collaborators are doing, knowing that your collaborators are doing the right thing, and taking that as your role. It is my role to know that other people that are on my team are doing the right thing, and it is also my role to make sure that I'm not letting down the other members of my team by doing something that undermines robust and reliable research. And I'll talk about that a lot when I get to this idea of harm avoidance as well. And then the last thing is that during the socialization process, people come to develop an identity for themselves. And an identity fuels a lot of behaviors that people have. If people's identity is, I am an ethical and moral researcher who does the right kind of research to build useful knowledge for other people, that produces a much different orientation towards the work than somebody who is just, I am a person who publishes a lot of articles at any cost. The person in the first category, the person who says, I'm going to build a robust and reliable body of research, that person is going to produce a lot of research, and it's going to be very high quality, but the person in the second category is going to be really dangerous to the field, and we'll talk about that as well. It does have broader implications. So, one of the core things that I want to underline for this idea of socialization that kind of runs counter to some of the ideas of socialization is that you're not going to change anybody's values. And that's something that I think the socialization research has demonstrated again and again and again. A deeply held value is something that started from childhood and someone has been inculcated in year after year after year after year. Do you think that a half-hour, 2-hour session at the beginning of a PhD program or other research endeavor is going to permanently change someone's values? I don't believe that that's what's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is you have to find out what those core values are and find a way to attach doing good research to those values. So you want to find where the winds are blowing and set your sails to that. I think that that's one of the core things. So we know from socialization that values don't change all that much. Instead, what we have to do is find ways to put behavior in accord with values that work. So we're going to try to pair research values with personal values and emphasize how research fulfills those values with a lot of this ethical socialization. Okay, the first really core principle that I mentioned before was the problem of putting people in a position where unethical research seems like the right thing to do. There's a lot of pressure, and that's why I have the pressure gauges up here. There's a lot of pressure on people who are just coming into the field to produce a lot of research right away. And I know this because I am a person who sends that message to PhD students. It's very important if you want to get a good job. All our PhD students know this. All new researchers know this. You need to have publications attached to your name. There's an enormous amount of pressure around that, and people don't want to let other people down in their department, don't want to let themselves down in terms of their personal goals. So as people start to see that as a really narrowly construed goal, we know that they are going to do whatever it takes to reach that goal. And that's exactly the concern that we have here. Incentives for publication tend to trump incentives for knowledge creation. I can count the number of publications you have very easily. I can target that specific difficult goal, and if I know what that specific difficult goal is and I can focus all my attention on that, I will, and I will ignore everything in the background that doesn't contribute to that goal. As a result, I am going to have an enormous incentive to, in gray areas, kind of push towards doing research that doesn't have that feeling of robustness, that doesn't have that feeling of reliability, that I care more about getting published than doing things the right way. That's a key concern that we really have, and it has to do with the incentive structure of the field in general. A second thing that comes in with this pressure is you want to have social approval from other people. Well, if I've got this really specific goal, not only do I want to meet my personal goal, but I feel like I'm letting other people down. I know that a lot of people I've worked with have said that they feel guilty to their colleagues, to their organization for not publishing at a rapid enough rate. So it's not just that it's happening on an internal basis, but even your pro-social values, I want to do the right thing, can be harnessed in the service of doing research that isn't very good. It's kind of a catastrophe, I think, really, that our incentives end up being that misaligned, but it does happen. Another thing we know, so goals tend to undermine people's ethical behavior sometimes. The desire to do the right thing for other people undermines ethical behaviors too. And a final thing is that people who are under a great deal of stress tend to be more likely to engage in unethical behavior. Their self-regulatory resources are depleted and they can't push themselves to work in the right direction. So in the same way that a person who's done a lot of hard math problems has a hard time resisting the cookie, we also, when we're doing a lot of hard research and we're feeling all this pressure to do things, has difficulty resisting the incentive to say, I don't know, it's close enough, maybe we'll exclude a few more cases, or maybe I'll p-hack this data set for a while. So I'm not talking about just falsifying data. I'm talking about someone with the right values who can shade over into, that's good enough, I can make that work. Under pressure, that's when people will do it, and it's very tempting to do that. So that's one of the key concerns that we have in this domain. Not that people are walking in with magnificently poor values and we need to fix them, but they may walk in with magnificently good values and we may distort those values unintentionally. And that does produce a lot of stress for people. A lot of the incentives tend to produce stress for people. So I want to talk about some of the ways to offset this, but I think at the front, the very first thing that we as educators who are working with PhD students, as PhD students who are thinking about this, as senior faculty who are working with junior faculty, we need to let them know, yes, there's a lot of pressure, but the pressure really is to produce good science. And producing poor science only has short-term benefits for you. And this is shown by a lot of people who are able to publish a lot and then find themselves the victims of a string of retractions and their careers are kind of ruined, which is going to get into my next topic really quickly. So one of the big things here is we need to think about what signals we're sending and whether they are pressuring people to publish at the expense of doing the right thing. So the pressure should be on, did you do this the right way? And we should make sure that we have at least as much pressure on do things the right way, produce real knowledge, produce science that is replicable, have that as the focus rather than just purely the publication numbers. So now I have, I think this is John Dillinger behind bars. We have the second thing where we're appealing to people's self-interest. Part of the way that you get people to behave in a way that is consistent with norms is to put punishments out there for doing the wrong thing and putting rewards for doing the right thing out there. When we talk about ethical behavior, it often seems like we don't talk about self-interest, but the best way, the easiest route to get somebody to do the right thing if they don't want to is to put consequences in there that make them do the right thing. This goes to a certain extent against my general theme of you need to have ethical researchers as a starting point. This is so that we can catch people who aren't ethical to begin with, I guess. That's part of the reason. And it's also when you're doing this cost-benefit calculation in your head. Should I fudge this little result? Should I exclude a few cases? Should I change my hypotheses after the fact because I really want to get this paper published and I'm just going to kind of massage the data until it tells just the right story? Using these cost-benefit analyses will push people towards doing something that's actually solid, replicable science. So the first thing that I think helps build up this idea of self-interest in producing good science is to make it everyone's responsibility in a research team to make sure that everybody is doing the right thing. This can be things like having other people in the research team check one another's work. If you make a mistake, that will be caught. And that makes a lot of sense for everybody on the research team to check one another because most people don't want to put their whole careers at risk for a bad paper. So one of the things you can do is just have a system of protocols for checking people's work and making sure that everybody sees it. If one person on the team has all the data, maybe somebody else should have access to that and make sure they're doing what they're doing. It reduces the anonymity and it reduces the extent to the research being done in the shadows. I think another thing is to clarify for people who are coming into the field what the risks of unethical research are. And it's not hard to find examples of people whose careers have been ruined, whose many years of very hard work have been ruined based on the fact that they did research that was demonstrably false. Nobody gets fired from their job for failing to find one significant relationship. Nobody gets fired from their job or has their career burned down because one paper wasn't accepted. But people do have those kinds of consequences for producing research that is really shoddy. And that's one of the things to bring up is, yes, there are advantages to publishing more, and it may feel tempting to do things that aren't really robust and reliable in order to get published more, but the consequences of doing things the wrong way can be catastrophic. So there's the internal risks, there's the career risks, and all of this comes down to people doing a cost-benefit analysis in their head and saying, here's I guess you can think of it sort of in a game theoretic way. There's a certain amount of ignorance that my reviewers will have about whether I did things the right way. Can I exploit that ignorance? We want to cut down on that ignorance by having internal checks and also by letting people know, it doesn't pay in the long run, because eventually you will get caught. Somebody will have that twinge of conscience that's on your research team, and it can make the whole thing go wrong, or somebody externally will catch you. So that's just the pure self-interest. I start with this, it always makes me feel a little sick to start with, all you have to do is punish and reward, and that we eliminate the problem of ethics. But it is worth mentioning, because not everybody has good values to begin with, and you kind of have to accept that. And the second thing is that this can be used to reinforce a lot of the other principles, so that it takes out the ambiguity. Should I go with my values or self-interest? Hopefully you can align the two so that there's not that kind of conflict. Okay, the second thing is emphasizing a social context of what is the right thing to do. Now this is where research on organizational, professional, and even lifespan socialization comes in. There's some definite ways that we can send messages about what is or is not ethical or right ways to do research. The first thing is looking at norms and identity. When people enter a PhD program and are working in a research university, a very strong sense of self around that is created. And we want to bring into that the idea of we are good researchers and we have a code of conduct that we all follow. Having a code really improves the extent to which people see their identity of being a successful researcher and being an ethical researcher. They want to see those two identities merge for people. So we don't act that way, and we have social mechanisms for catching people who don't act that way. So this is one way that we can get, even in the absence of observation, even in the absence of incentives, just sheer normative force can make people do a lot of things. The second thing is from social cognitive theory, this idea that people will find role models in the environment, especially high status role models. So when advisors are looking at students and thinking of how they're going to shepherd them through the research process, they need to make sure that they are showing them how they are doing ethical and correct research and making sure that their science is robust and reliable. So on the one hand, they are establishing roles. Your role is to do these analyses. You must make sure that you are not doing anything that I wouldn't approve of. You must make sure, and that I think really falls on the senior researcher in every team, to say, I am assigning you to this role. I will not give you negative consequences for failing to find the results I want. I will give you consequences for failing to do things the right way. I will not say that something is wrong just because you weren't able to push through this project fast enough, as long as you are working hard, you are doing the right thing, and you are following a code of conduct that really helps. So that falls a lot on senior researchers. This is one of the most immediate things we can do beyond any other requirement is that. And then also describing and enforcing consequences right away. It's obvious what the consequences of not getting published are for almost anybody who enters a program. Enough students and faculty know immediately what those are. The downside consequences of doing things the wrong way also need to be emphasized as well. And then the final thing is look at the peer set for students and see how they've been socialized and make sure that they're not sending the wrong signals. And now we're going to splice this together here. Okay. The next thing when we're thinking about improving research ethics is thinking about people's internal personal values. I mentioned before, it's really hard to change somebody's core values. Even in something as powerful an experience as an all-day, every day for 5 years, hopefully 5, not 6, 5-year PhD program, that you are really going to shape people's values. They have the values that they already have. So what you need to do is think about what those values are and see how you can tie doing research in a way that's replicable, that's robust, that's reliable to those same principles. So the first thing is you want to look at people's core values. In a perfect world, you would screen out people who don't have the right core values. Some people are just not that motivated by doing the right thing. Some people are motivated by figuring out how to make up a fake data set that they can put online and use that for all their studies. It's not that hard to do something like that. It's not that hard to do the p-hacking data sets. Those are both very easy things to do, and the best way to keep people who are likely to do that out of the field is to really try to screen on values as early as possible. This is, of course, a notoriously difficult task, but it's still something you should consider. To what extent does somebody have a pure bottom line mentality? We probably don't need people like that in our field. A second thing is that we want to develop habits among those with good values, and that they see that their behavior is tied to their deeper level values. A person with the right values can develop habits really easily during the socialization phase. like I said, values are difficult to change. Habits are really easy to change. Habits are the sort of thing that we can, on a daily basis, change. We can change our behavior. And so we want people to have that habit of, I'm going to tell people exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to tell my advisor exactly where this data came from. I'm going to tell everybody on the research team any snafus that are happening. I need to develop a habit of open communication so that there aren't these mistakes going on. And I think open communication is one of the core things. The second thing is to show links between people's values and research ethics. If you value being of service to your community, here's how doing good research matters. If you value being a person in a highly esteemed field, here's why doing good research helps you be part of that. If you value having the professor as an identity, you want to make sure that that professor identity is something that is really admirable. You don't want to undermine that by doing things that lead to all these embarrassing retractions. And so just by emphasizing your value on being a good professor might be something you can do as part of that. And if your value is simply on making money, that's not necessarily a bad value by itself, then you need to say why doing robust, reliable, and good research does have a better financial payout in the long term. You can think of all those different values. Very few people are motivated by just one thing, and that's one of the things where moral foundations theory comes in. Look at all of those. Most people are going to be motivated partially by money, partially by their field, partially by service to the community, and you want to bring all of those together and say doing good research, real research, is the best way to achieve all those things, and it's better, it's a better, faster, more reliable way to get to the ends you want. And the final thing is to develop an identity where you see yourself as an ethical researcher and pair that with everything else about you. Who are you? I am the right kind of researcher. I am the kind of person who does things well, and that's another way you can use a personal value for people. Okay. Another thing that I think is really important and that I know more from talking to people who have been involved in research projects where there are people who've been caught in unethical behavior. It's really heartbreaking when you know somebody who did nothing wrong and yet one of their colleagues did something wrong. It's really awful talking to people who've been in that situation, and I do know people who've been in that situation. People who are engaged in unethical research practices need to understand it is not a victimless crime. You're not just grabbing pages on a journal. It feels like when people are doing it, I would assume, that it feels like, oh, I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just getting a paper in. All I'm doing is just massaging the data a little bit. And what's harmed by it? Well, the thing that could be harmed by it is the people with whom you've worked. And it can be a very serious harm. That's another value that you really want to think about. The first set of people who are hurt are people in your immediate social context. So you need to think about, how can I go down to the collaborators I've been working with and say, you know that paper we just published? There's something terribly wrong with it. I actually did something wrong. I'm worried we're going to get caught now because somebody else saw our paper published and knows there's something wrong. Could you actually stomach that? You shouldn't be able to. Again, this gets back to the person with bad values already being screened out, you hope. But most people, that's a real check on this behavior. If you remind people, you're going to have to pay the consequences socially for this. And then another thing I put up here is, it's not just hurting people in the field. Think of family and friends. Think of how they're going to be affected if you become the next person who is, I'm not going to name names for people who have been caught in this, but do you want to be the next poster child for bad research practices in academia? There are a lot of people who want to knock down academic research. There are a lot of people who want to undermine what's happening in our field. You don't want to be the person who becomes publicly known for that. Again, it's a self-interested motive, but it's based on this social context. You don't want to be in that position. You want to be the person who is known for doing good research. And if you are the person who's doing robust, reliable research, that one person runs your study, another person runs your study, another person does something that's similar to your study, we keep getting the same thing, and that's the upside of it. Look at all my collaborators. They all benefit because we did the right kind of research that other people are going to be able to replicate. So there is that social context for doing the good kind of research. The second thing is to think about the larger context of research. Now this requires a person who is highly pro-social that you're sending the message to, but if it is a person like that, this is probably the person who's not that likely to engage in unethical behavior to begin with, but remind people that the field as a whole is damaged whenever something gets torn down, and it's a massive damage to our field. Our credibility as a science is severely limited when we go out and say, this week we said this, next week we found out there was something terribly wrong with those studies and we don't believe this. And by the way, I don't know if you can trust anything we say. We become very unreliable as reporters if we continually are changing our story, not because science changes, there's nothing wrong with that, but because we actually know that something was done that was dishonest. That's really dangerous. So we really want to think about the effects on our discipline. For someone who's pro-social, you're going to start to see, like, think of not just me, not just my immediate friends, not just the people I've worked with, but the field as a whole. It does enormous damage for us. And that should, for senior researchers, serve as a really major impetus for us to think that ethical socialization is an important idea, because it's the reputation of the field. The second thing is that this also damages end user communities. I know we have the section on practical implications all the time in our papers. If people are following that advice, you kind of hope that it's not telling them to do something that could have catastrophically bad consequences. So we really worry about whether or not our research is leading people in the right direction or the wrong direction. It can also, if we're doing the right kind of research, make our field look better. Look, we found something that's very useful. So I don't want to emphasize just the doom and gloom side of this. That's why I have the person climbing up the mountain with help from others. There is something really good that happens by thinking about providing help. Okay. So the key principles that I started off with is that robust and reliable research starts with ethical researchers. And ethical researchers are the product of a social environment. The first thing we want to do when we're developing ethical research is to do no harm and make sure that we're doing things that create a positive climate for ethical behavior and don't put so much pressure on them that they think that getting published at all costs is the right thing to do. The second thing is that we want to look to structures and behaviors and make sure those are in place that send the right signals. And finally, we want to consider a lot of different tools like self-interest, personal values, social context, and harm avoidance to produce better science. Thank you.